Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. I am your host, Christine Smith, and I am so excited to introduce my guests today. They are composers Steffen Thum and Max Aruj. Steffen Thum is a German composer for film, TV, games, and advertising based in Berlin. With over 70 credits to his name, he has extensive experience across high-profile studio films, independent cinema, TV, and advertising campaigns. Max Aruj is a composer born and raised in Los Angeles. His recent projects include MoviePass, MovieCrash, Lansky, starring Harvey Keitel, and The Ice Road, starring Liam Neeson. Both are successful film composers with experience working in high-profile projects with composers such as Lorne Balfe, Zimmer, and others, and they're here to talk with us today about their film and the work on their film, Betrayal. So Steffen and Max, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Musicians versus the World.
Thanks for having us.
I'm excited to chat with you. I have really enjoyed listening to the score for Betrayal, and I am excited to jump into this and kind of figure out how you did things and how you composed all of this. But my first question is, because Max, you're in London right now, and Steffen, you're in Berlin, you said. How did the two of you get together for this project? Steffen, let's start with you. How did you end up working in LA and working with Max and all of those things?
Yeah. It's been quite a journey over the past years. I originally started studying in Germany, which is where I'm from, and then did an exchange here in LA. And after that year, I, through just lucky timing, ended up getting a job at Remote Control Productions, the company of Hans Zimmer, and we both got to know each other there. Max and I working for a composer named Lorne Balfe. Mm-hmm. And that would be the next 6 years of my time in LA. And we've pretty much been there working for Lorne for all those years. And obviously, day after day, working together, we quickly developed a good working relationship and a friendship as well, and developed a shorthand working together. Working on many different things for Lorne, and then also eventually projects on our own. Mm-hmm. And Betrayal is one of them.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I know a lot of composers would just do anything for a chance to work with Lorne, and you said that it was luck, but was there any effort involved there? You just run into him at a coffee shop? Like, how did you?
Oh, no. I mean, it was just, I was referring to lucky timing, because sometimes these things just fall into place. It was not planned at all. And with the way it works with these positions, working for a composer of like Lorne, is usually those positions are filled by somebody who's been working there for a long time. Right. And I guess it just happened to be the right timing where that position would open up, and I was one of a few names maybe forwarded to Lorne, and got to meet him, and then one thing led to another, and I ended up staying for quite a while there.
Yeah. And then now you're back in Germany. Mm-hmm, you just correct. Like work remotely now? Is that how you work?
Yes. Yeah. I moved back in 2020, which was just, it was already planned for a while. And then the pandemic hit, which obviously was not ideal. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I made the best out of it, and it's been going really, really well so far.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. How about you, Max? How did you end up in all of this?
I was at college at USC, and I met someone who knew someone who knew someone who got my resume sent over to Remote Control. And then I interned there, and on my first day I met Lorne. And for that summer and the next year, I was just doing intern stuff. And then after a year of being there, he asked me if I wanted to kind of hang out with him for the summer, and then that meant work for him. And it just went really well. I didn't take any days off, I remember. And yeah, we got along, and he was obviously super talented. And that was kind of before he blew up and really kind of came into his own. And so it was so exciting to be a part of that and watch him grow and be a part of all of his awesome projects. And after college, I ended up working for him for another 8 years. So total, it was 10 years. And yeah, so we did a lot in that time. And yeah, and Steffen came and then we just got along great. Started working together, and it just felt very natural. And just time flew by, and then here we are after having left remote and left Lorne. And yeah, I'm still happy to be working with Steffen, and yeah, very grateful.
Yeah. Well, so with your backgrounds being so different, like, you're training in different continents, do you think that helped your collaboration, or was there a little bit of a learning curve? What would you say, Max?
I don't really think so at all. And I think, and I love your question because, yeah, our backgrounds are so different. But I think that's the beauty of music, not to sound corny, is that it doesn't really matter where you're from or who you are. But if you write beautiful music and you can communicate with people, and that comes across to an audience, and you can work with filmmakers and have good working relationships and take feedback and get along with people and build relationships, then it can work great. Um, but also, I think the second part of that answer is, if you can understand and work within the same software and you can communicate on a technical level, then you are in the money, because it means that your creative ideas, you can relate to one another in a literal sense so that the other person can hear it, and you
Mhm.
can look at their work in the software and you can understand where they're coming from musically. So in that way, it's the best of all worlds.
Okay. Yeah. So what software do the two of you like to use?
It's
Use
Cubase.
Cubase.
Yeah, and I think just adding to what Max said, I think big part of that was obviously also just these years working for Lorne. Just kind of it's basically a whole new level of school that you go through after you've already studied and had some experience, but then working for somebody at that level, just yeah, brings you up to pace in a whole different way. I
Oh, well,
think, and going through all these
yeah.
projects that we were able to work on, Max and I together, basically just already formed a link, so
Mhm.
that even no matter what the experiences were before that, going through that journey together kind of brought us up to speed, and we were basically yeah thinking the same way after a while.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it was very seamless to work on these other
Yeah,
projects together, just the
yeah.
two of you. So I like how you said it was like school on another level. What was the biggest thing that you learned working for a company like Lawrence for that long?
I think there were a lot of big lessons to be learned about craft, the
Mm.
craft of it. I think I always loved film and the role that music plays in film, and had I guess a good understanding of how I would want to approach it. But working on, I think it's all about learning by doing over such a long period of time,
Hmm.
and really honing your craft by diving into a scene again and again, and addressing fixed notes, and working in always having to work at a certain professional level that really kind of makes you appreciate your own craft in a different way. And then obviously learning about a lot about different techniques and production and orchestration and arranging and all that. That all came naturally throughout the task that we were given.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Max? What was the big lesson that you learned?
I think one thing that just popped into my mind is attention to detail in on a scale that was unimaginable, in that when you're writing these symphonic pieces and there's so many things going on. And also on the topic of working with Stefan and working with someone else, is that if you receive their piece and you need to work on it and with it, you'd want it to be really clean and beautifully written, because if you pop open the hood, so to speak, and it's very messy and you don't understand it, then your life is difficult, and then that makes the other person's life difficult. So when you're in this kind of commune where you're working with other really talented musicians, you want to put attention to detail into your stuff so that the level of everyone's stuff is raised, and
Yeah.
just really caring about the details greatly.
Yeah. Well, how do you balance working quickly with that level of detail?
I think the answer is just practice.
Gotcha.
There's no secret other than practice to so many things. And I think in this case, that's the only way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mention both of you writing beautiful music. And if we look at the score of Betrayal, there's one piece that is like objectively beautiful, but the rest of it is really, really cool, but it wouldn't be conventionally what we would call beautiful music. So my question is, do you enjoy writing the beautiful music, or do you enjoy writing this kind of textual, sort of scary music? I guess, Max, let's ask you, which one do you prefer?
You need a balance of both.
Yeah.
Because after you've written a lot of beautiful music, sometimes you want to take a break and say, wait a minute, let's just do something more abstract. But then after writing a lot of abstract music, you look back and you say, wow, is there structure, and where is the tune in this? So I think you need a balance of both, to keep your ideas fresh too, because one may inform the other.
Right. Yeah. What about you, Steffen?
Yeah, it's the same for me. I think you definitely want to have both, and it's also something I love about the job, that every project will ask for something different. And I think in terms of Betrayal, we knew from the get-go that the story was going to be really dark and bleak. And it's difficult to approach a topic like that with something very musical and beautiful. I mean, there are moments of that in the film, but for the most part of it, it's a quite raw and dark story, and the way the film feels. And we just wanted the music to reflect that, and obviously that also came out of the conversation with the director Roger Griffith and the producers. And yeah, that's how we started going about it. But yeah, it's definitely nice to have a balance, which is why we have certain moments like that song that we'll probably talk about in a bit, that we kind of came up with as a counterpoint to kind of not have it all dark and bleak, but those little rays of light, so to speak.
Well, yeah, and those little rays of light, they make the darker parts even darker, honestly, because you don't get accustomed to the darkness. You get kind of refreshes your palate a little bit. But so let's talk a little bit about getting a little technical, this idea of texture and how you use texture to build tension. Because throughout most of this, as I was listening to the score, you use, instead of more melodic ideas, you'll have little motives here and there, but a lot of the sound, a lot of the tension comes from building of different timbres, building of different layers of texture. So you said you were talking to the director about it, but then after you talked to the director, just as a collaborative idea, how did you come up with, this is the way we're going to, this is the way we're going to structure that? Like, how did you do that? Max, why don't you go ahead and take that?
After our call with Roger, we just sit down and we just say what our initial reactions are, and just use our instinct. And Steffen will say one thing and I'll say, yeah, I agree, but also, what about this? And Steffen will say, oh, yes. And we talk for 30 minutes, an hour. I mean, I sort of remember that day, Steffen, actually. I just remember sitting in the studio that day, and I don't know why I remember that day, but the phone was on that table in the middle of the room, like this moving table. And we spoke, and for 30 minutes, and we went off into our rooms, just started working. And I think by the end of that night, maybe it was 11 p.m., we already had some stuff we were kind of, excited about.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just remember that day for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. So Steffen, what I've heard is that you experimented with some string textures, maybe some cello and some violin. How did you come up with sort of the sonic palette of what you were going to do with this?
I think we started from the beginning, when we talked about the sonic palette of the whole film. I guess we wanted it to feel, our characters spend a lot of time in the woods. They live in the Scottish woodlands, and there's a lot of sneaking through the woods at night, and some that almost has a little bit of a life of its own. That whole soundscape that you just walk alone through the woods, and you hear all kinds of things, the footsteps on the leaves and all that. And we wanted the score to have a link to that world by us using mostly organic sounds. meaning anything wooden or maybe also some metallic sounds. And yeah, that obviously included string instruments, but not in your conventional way, playing in a beautiful orchestra, but more like soloistic and very kind of close mic'd and very raw.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a project where I decided I'm gonna get myself a violin and a cello and just start recording random, just noise, scrapes and weird stuff. And obviously, we also got for certain parts, we also got professional players on that really know what they're doing. But it was a mixture of that, of just getting creative and experimenting with different textures and creating tension that way.
Yeah. What was the, I guess, most unconventional thing you did with that? Was there any like sound that you're like, whoops, didn't mean to make that sound, but it's really cool, so I'm going to put it in this cue?
I already had an idea of what I wanted to try. There were probably no happy accidents, rather something where I was hoping to get something to sound the way I wanted it to sound.
Max, what about you? Did you have a favorite sound that you found that you're just like, oh, this is perfect?
There were quite a few, but I think in one cue, deer hunting, I was just clicking through before we got on our call. We found this really interesting low drum roll that ends with a bang that just was very, it felt very cinematic to me, and I think it worked really well in the scene.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite ones, where when we discovered it and put it up the picture, it was very exciting. And it's not groundbreaking, the idea of a drum roll, but I guess done in this way, in this film, it just felt really right.
Yeah. Isn't that fun? That like context is everything when it comes to
That's right.
To music and to textures and things like that. My favorite one was Shrine, because of what you did with the vocals on there. It's like you got this like pop, 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 like sort of thing, and it doesn't even sound human afterwards. So can you walk me through how you did that? Because it sounded like there was maybe some delay on it. I couldn't really put it together how you did it, but it was really, really, really cool. So who was like the one in charge of that one that can like teach me how you did that?
I'm trying to remember, Steffen, who was in charge of that one. Can you? It was 2 years
collaboration.
ago. But I think. Well, yeah, that is a real collaboration, because sometimes you have so many versions of something, and then things start overlapping. And I truly don't remember. But what I do remember is that the song came before that. So what that told us is that vocals are fair game. And when vocals are fair game, it's very exciting, because in most movies you can't and don't, because the director might say there's dialogue. We can't have female or male mumbling or anything over the dialogue. What we have to do is find our moments, because in any film score, if the film is 90 minutes, you don't have 90 minutes of carte blanche. You have, I would say, 5 moments in the score where you can do something unusual and cool and really jump out and kind of state your name. And so I think that was one of them where we were able to get really weird, and I think when people see the film, I think that scene warrants it for a very unusual occurrence and where the main characters stumble upon. So I think we just wanted something that maybe sounded like the opposite of the beautiful music or a prayer, something much more internal and unsettling. And once vocals are fair play, you can just grab a mic and start doing something to see if it works.
So is that your vocals on there? It sounded like a woman. Is it?
It's not my. I wish I could
it was like
say
a woman,
it was
but
my
maybe
vocals.
It's not.
Well, what happens is you try an idea, and then you start making some samples and looking for things and working with a great vocalist.
Yeah.
And in this case, Stephanie was the one who sang the beautiful song.
Mm-hmm.
And you just slowly make progress. It sounds silly at first, but then you start layering it with something more traditional, like a bass, and you give it some structure with some percussion. And then it's sort of something very strange on top of music. And then it starts to become one over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Did you want to add anything about that, Steffen? Or?
Yeah, I was also just thinking how we went about that specific scene and the piece for it. It probably was one of those cues where we experimented a lot and Max was like, "Oh, I have this idea, and I might have had this idea," and then it kind of came together. But I think with the vocals, I mean, next to stuff like string textures, percussion was obviously played a big role in the score.
Yeah.
And I think in cases like that, with the chopped up vocals, these samples, we treated vocals as a percussive element as well.
Right.
And I think in the case of Shrine, it was important to establish a bit of a sense of an otherworldliness, because it's kind of a very mystic or a strange scene where they walk through the woods, or three brothers, the main characters, and encounter these weird. It's basically a shrine in the woods, and they don't know what to make of it. Seems like a scene out of Blair Witch Project,
right?
And they're a little freaked out by it, and yeah, it was important to have a piece of music that would just make you think, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. It's kind of this like that uncanny valley. You're like, I think this is human, but it doesn't sound
exactly
like how humans would normally do things.
Right.
So yeah, I thought it was so clever. I was like, this works really, really well. So, and I thought it was just such a perfect example of the way you both used texture in this to create all of that tension. And Max, I liked how you had mentioned that the lullaby, the beautiful song, The Red and Weary Paths, is that the title of it? That had already been introduced. So at that point, vocals was fair game. So let's talk a little bit about that song, because it's gorgeous. It has amazing harmonies. It's so beautiful. And what was the idea behind that song? I know you said that it was supposed to be a contrast to the darkness, but was that, to have that in there, was that your idea? Was it the director's idea? Whose idea was that?
Steffen, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think we started with a piece of music that they had placed in the edit at the beginning of the film, which had vocals in it, and then that started obviously a discussion like, oh, how shall we include that into our score? And with that in mind, we then gravitated towards the idea of having it be a lullaby that the mother, which is a character in the movie that we don't see much. We see her mostly in flashback scenes, but basically just kind of do a quick dive into the story of the film. Our three brothers plot to kill their father due to the death of their mother, and they blame the father for it. And it's an abusive father. He's done terrible things to them and the mother, and so that's basically the setup from the start of the film. So it's very, very tragic. We kind of wanted to establish that lullaby as something that could be the voice of the mother throughout the film, because obviously the memory of her haunts the brothers the whole time, and that's basically the catalyst of this whole story. So that was the idea of it, and then we kind of started thinking about how do we make this sound like it belongs into that world, and it seemed to be a fun thing, a challenge, so to speak, to have the song be in Scottish Gaelic, which obviously none of us speaks, but we started writing the lyrics in English, and then found a great collaborator in our vocalist, Stephanie Healy, who was able to help us with the translation and get it to sound right.
So why Gaelic? Is it because it sounds otherworldly or mystical?
I think we presented the director and the producers with both versions, the English version and the Scottish Gaelic one, but there was something more mystical and otherworldly about that foreign language that you just hear it, and it sounds way more interesting than just any old English lyric, so to speak. And
it's true. It's effective.
I think the idea was for it to be like an age-old folk song, something that the mother could have sung to the kids when they were young, while singing them to sleep, and that was the idea behind it. Just have it be that character.
Oh, okay. And it's just kind of haunting throughout the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So what were some of the things that you did? Did you bring it into some of these other cues, like the textural cues? Did you just put little snippets in there sometimes, or?
It's there's hints of it in several cues,
Yeah.
sometimes very subtle, but the main occurrences of it are at the beginning of the film and at the end, so kind of to bookend it all.
Yeah.
And not until the very end, when the film ends and we go into the credits, we hear the full version with lyrics.
Mm.
At the beginning, I think it's just open vowel vocals
Mhm.
to kind of introduce us to the theme thematically. But yeah, not until the very end we hear the full version of the song.
Gotcha. So do either of you have a lot of experience with vocal or choral music, or was this kind of a new experience?
I would say it comes up every now and then.
Hmm.
And Stefan and I ourselves aren't professional singers, but that doesn't mean that we can't grab a microphone and start singing things and trying things.
Right.
It doesn't always have to sound the most beautiful, and especially with a movie like this, it's not always supposed to sound beautiful. So I think
Mhm.
we approach these situations with the humility of a non-singer, but with the confidence of a composer, a modern composer, where you need to be willing and able to try anything.
Right.
And then you might have an idea, and then you have the privilege of working with a great musician who then will say, okay, here's your idea, but then here's your idea even better, and will
Mm.
bring their artistry to the table, and then make the piece become a real piece of music with their expression.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, kind of going along with that, do either of you have a favorite cue that you worked on? I'll let you think about it for a second, but and I know it's kind of hard because I think they're all very, very, very cool. But looks like Stefan's still thinking. So, Max, do you know your favorite cue?
I like deer hunting because it's one of the first cues in the movie, and we knew we had to get that right because that sets the tone. I mean, sort of after the vocal piece earlier,
Right, of
but
course.
deer
Yeah.
hunting sets the tone in terms of action and thriller. So I think that the piece was we wrote the piece a lot longer originally, and it's a tempo ramp, and those are always they present their own level of challenges once you're working with something where every bar is truly different from the next. So on a technical level, if you have to work with it and do timing things, it's kind of a nightmare. But once you get it to work, and if the director likes it and it increases the tension and brings you into the world of a great thriller, then I think it's a big win.
Yeah. Yeah. That one's really cool.
Mhm.
All right, Stefan, do you know your favorite?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a couple. I mean, the song definitely turned out to be a favorite because of the beautiful vocal performance. Shrine was another one that was really fun. There's also a really subtle cue for a scene that I personally really enjoyed, also because the scene was great. Later on in the film, um, two of the brothers, because as the story progresses, they start to distrust each other more and more, and kind of start going against each other. And there's one scene where they kind of two of the two older brothers sit across from each other at the table and just have a very calm discussion about what's going to happen next. And it's super calm, but also super threatening.
Yeah.
And I think the cue we had for that was very subtle and very nuanced, which is obviously sometimes a lot of fun to do. But while you have like these big action pieces or a wild chase through the woods, and you have your score go at a 10, but sometimes these super subtle nuanced cues that just barely noticeable, but just add enough to make the scene work are a lot of fun. And I think that was one of the ones I really enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so fun. I love hearing what everybody's favorite cues are because just it's just fun for me to hear that. So after this experience, do you still like working together and you're going to try and do more projects together?
Let me think about that one.
No, I think, yeah, every project with Stefan is always an adventure, and I'll always up for more anytime.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think all those weird years working together, kind of in the same room or in rooms next to each other, or already proved that. And I think now, since we are in different places of the world and have done stuff together remotely, it still works just the same. So I think, yeah, we kind of know how to approach that no matter what.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Technology makes it so you can be on
Yeah,
completely different countries and you can still work together so well.
absolutely.
Or I mean, even this conversation, we're on completely different continents, and it's like
It's
you're
incredible.
just right here. It's amazing, and technology is incredible. Well, I have so loved talking with both of you. As we wrap up, I would love to hear if you have some advice for aspiring composers, aspiring musicians that you have learned along the way that you think would be helpful. Steffen, should we start with you? Do you have any advice?
I think one of the important things to remember for anybody is there's no right or wrong way to go about it. There's so many roads you can take, and I think it's really always about trusting your gut and whatever you're passionate about, kind of go refine that, whatever your sound might be. I think a lot of people will probably always try to chase certain trends and hear something like, oh, now I have to do that, but maybe that's not your voice.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of trusting your gut on that and doing what is truly you. And I think the other thing is, if you want to go into film scoring, not just study music, but also really learn and understand film, the language of film, and how a story works and how scenes work. Yeah. Study editing and, the whole vocabulary and grammar of film.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah, great advice. Max, how about you?
I think to cover the other part of that answer, I think for young composers is to be gracious, be a good listener, be respectful of people, and go above and beyond. Just be your best self, because this isn't a solo career. You're working with directors and editors and musicians, and if people don't like working with you, you're going to put yourself in a really, really difficult situation. So you got to have the skill, and you got to be someone that people get along with and that can feel comfortable working with, because you could be a great musician, but in film music in particular, if you can't be in a room with people, you're screwed.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. You gotta be well-rounded and everything. Well, Steffen and Max, it has been such a joy chatting with you. I have so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
Our pleasure. Thank you.